Welcome, fellow Lions fans, to the medical edition of the Detroit Lions podcast. I'm Dr. Jimmy Liao, University of Michigan Medical School grad, board-certified in family medicine. We're only 2.5 weeks from the regular season opener, so things are getting exciting around here. We've had some medically fascinating topics the past couple weeks, including guardian caps and how it affected the Lions this preseason. We had a player getting a concussion just from whiplash. Player getting high ankle sprains on both sides, not just in the same season, not just in the same game, but on the same play, the very first play of the game. We had players getting surgery for MCLs and a hamstring, things that usually don't require surgery. We had a player with a mystery non-football illness that's already kept him out of camp for over 4 weeks. And I'll discuss the startling new evidence that hot chicks cause ACL tears. Yeah, who knew? So I'm going to review all these issues and more over the past 2 weeks and discuss their prognosis of the players and their outlook going forward. With so much that's happened over the past couple weeks, I'm going to organize this episode into segments. Pre-Giants game, pre-Chiefs game, Chiefs game, and then post-Chiefs game. Let's start with everything that happened before our first preseason game against the Giants. As the old joke goes, I was watching an MMA event and a Lions-Giants practice broke out. So credit to the NFL here, though, for being at the forefront of hand fracture prevention by making players wear those guardian caps. The hand fracture that typically occurs is a boxer's fracture, which is typically the distal fifth metacarpal. Fifth finger being the pinky finger, metacarpal is the bone immediately before the finger bones. Fortunately for Kirby Joseph, he did not suffer a boxer's fracture even after getting in some pretty good shots in on Malik Neighbors. One of the players who was not wearing a guardian cap, though, was Andrew Thomas, who almost gave Tyrion Arnold a concussion. So this created some controversy. Why was Thomas not wearing one? Apparently it's mandatory unless you're wearing one of the other helmets that's been tested to be just as effective. The problem with giving out this exception is that the guardian cap helps prevent a player from giving other players concussions as well. So if Thomas was wearing one, it might have helped slightly prevent Arnold from getting the concussion, but fortunately no official concussion diagnosis for Tyrion, who was a medically clean prospect coming out of Alabama, but he did have a diagnosed concussion in 2023. Certainly do not want to be stacking up concussions early in his career. All Lions fans probably still have PTSD after Javid Best. So this raises the question, does a guardian cap actually prevent concussions? I had a good in-depth discussion about this with Jeff Risdon on The Huge Show a couple weeks ago. According to studies, no conclusive evidence yet that actually helps with concussions. But it's very hard to do a good study on something like this because there are so many variables you can't control. The most ideal way to do a study would be to actively bash players on the head with a specified amount of force to see if they got a concussion. We'd probably have a good data within a few days if we were able to do this. Apparently, the ethics board rejected this idea, though, so instead we're left with observational studies over time, also called cohort studies. These can take years to come to any conclusions, and the evidence with cohort studies can be unreliable. Theoretically, adding padding of any amount should help reduce forces that get transmitted to the skull, and the more padding the better. But one thing we should always keep in mind with anything new, technology, medicine, or therapy, there can be side effects or unintended consequences. With guardian caps, you possibly have more neck injuries if caps are gripping or catching on each other. There can also be negatives like weight, heat, and an increased likelihood of collisions with other players' arms, knees, and feet with that helmet being bigger. So you could actually increase injuries to other body parts. So smart for the NFL and players to not rush into this. Now the NFL did say that there's been a 52% decrease in concussions since starting the guardian caps 2 to 3 years ago. This could be due to other factors like less contact in practices or different coaching methods. Jeff had mentioned that people noticed players were using their heads less since wearing the guardian caps. So any reduction in concussions couldn't be entirely due to a change in player behavior. So the jury's still out on guardian caps. We've seen some players start to wear them in games, which looks a little bit goofy up close. It looks fine from a distance, though. What I don't understand is why helmets manufacturers can design that extra padding to be on the inside of the helmet, which seems like it would provide the same benefit. All right, enough about research studies. Let's get to some football. Unfortunately, we had a player with his third straight major injury. Emmanuel Moseley tore his right ACL last year, tore his left ACL the year before. This year tore his pec. It's hard to make an educated guess at a return here because there's a wide variety of tear types, at least 6 different ways you can fully tear the pec. And then you also have the possibility of partial tears. A tear can be anything from a complete tendon tear to a mild muscle strain. A full tear with surgery, typically 4 to 6 month recovery. We saw GJ last year returning 16 weeks. If Mosley has that same timeline, he'd be back for Thanksgiving, which would actually be a pretty darn good outcome. It'd give him 6 games in the regular season plus the playoffs. Now, there's a chance he could be back earlier than 16 weeks. J.J. Watt had surgery and returned in 9 weeks, although he came back extra early because of the playoffs. T.J. Watt did not have surgery and returned in 8 weeks. Marcus Williams last year did not have surgery and was back in 4 weeks. Mosley has not been put on IR, which means the Lions are keeping open the possibility of him returning this year. Scott Warhite, credit to him on Twitter, reminded me of a new rule in the NFL this year. The new IR rule is you can designate 2 players to go on IR without having them count against the 53-man roster on that cut-down date, which happens next week. So basically, you can have 55 guys on the 53-man roster. This makes it an easy decision to have John Kominski, who earlier tore his MCL, and Emmanuel Moseley to be those 2 guys. But if another player gets a long-term injury over the next week or so, then a difficult decision might need to be made. Now, Jeff Riston said that Moseley has looked great in camp since before the injury, looking very physical. So that's a very positive sign. Gives hope for him returning later this season. So let's not give up on Moseley yet. He's got a lot to overcome, including hardly playing any football for the past 2 years, but he could still make a difference for us later this year. So what's the outlook on him? We should hopefully hear word at some point whether he had surgery or not. If he had surgery, then let's hope for a late year return starting around Thanksgiving. If no surgery, then possibly much sooner. A couple other guys had injuries reported before the Giants game. That's Sam Laporta, who had a minor hamstring strain, and Kevin Zeitler with a shoulder, which was also reported by Dan Campbell as minor. So let's get on to the Giants game and what happened then. Let's start with Hendon Hooker, who certainly did way too much running, especially for a preseason game. It got him a concussion playing less than a quarter of football. He got hit a bunch of times, and it wasn't obvious which play actually caused the concussion, which generally signifies a milder concussion. Most guys can come back to play in 7 days following a concussion. In 2022, the vast majority of Lions who got a concussion played 7 days later. Last year, there were no official concussions during the regular season, which was sort of amazing. So Hooker ended up playing in the next preseason game against the Chiefs, which was 9 days later, so that was good. Another player that got a concussion during the Giants game was Antoine Green. This one was fascinating from a medical mechanism of injury standpoint. If you watch the video, which is on my Twitter highlights tab, you'll see that he gets knocked to the ground by a Giants player. As Green is falling, Sione Vaki's leg interrupts the fall, causing Green's head to whiplash without ever actually hitting the ground. I think the whiplash is what caused the concussion. A whiplash creates a very sudden acceleration-deceleration force, which causes the brain to impact the inside of the skull, which is how most concussions happen. The takeaway here is that the head doesn't actually need to hit anything to get a concussion. Briar Gallahue on Twitter asked, is that why they tell you after car accidents to be very careful with whiplash? Yeah, concussions is one reason. Other reasons are that you can have severe neck injuries of the muscles, ligaments, or the spine, and even more seriously, injuries to the large blood vessels like the carotid artery or the jugular vein that supply the brain. That would be a life-threatening issue. Antoine Green ended up getting waived. Dan Campbell mentioned that the doctors reviewed the scans, which was part of the decision. Now, this was unusual to hear this. If he literally meant scans, a CT or MRI is what's done for a concussion, and it's very unusual for something serious to show up in that kind of imaging for a concussion. The possibilities there would include a bleed in the brain swelling, or skull fracture, all of which would require a neurosurgeon management. As I mentioned earlier, it's possible the concerning scans were not for the brain, but for something in the neck area, like involving the spine or ligaments or blood vessels. Let's move on now to Connor Galvin, who tore his left knee MCL in the fourth quarter. He got his leg trapped by a Giants defender, causing him to fall awkwardly and do the splits, and thus tearing his MCL. He had played the most plays of any offensive tackle during the game, so it's quite possible that he was our primary offensive tackle backup going into the season. So this could be a big loss if Decker and Sewell don't stay healthy, or if our other backups like Sorsdahl and Gio Manu don't develop. Now, he's reportedly having surgery, which would make this the second MCL, including John Kominski, to have MCL surgery this year. Most MCLs don't need surgery, so this is unusual. The indications would include an avulsion fracture, a distal tear of the ligament, or an entrapment of the ligament, where the torn ligament is trapped by something else and can't heal properly. Other guys that got hurt during the Giants game include David Bada, a defensive tackle who had a right Achilles injury. The video did not show anything definitive according to my review. It appears like he started limping over 2 to 3 plays, so there wasn't a single moment of injury that I saw. Hopefully this is a good sign. It's unclear if this is a full rupture or a partial tear of the Achilles, but he's already been waived, and Dan Campbell says he's out for the year. Nate Ling, a defensive end who was an undrafted free agent, had a shoulder injury, got put on IR, and he's done for the year as well. All right, let's move on to guys who did play in the game. Nate Sudfeld, coming off his left ACL from last year, was wearing a big left knee brace, likely for precautionary reasons. Did not play well, of course, so that's a concern. James Houston, one of the guys we're really tracking this preseason, did play. He's coming off his right high ankle sprain and a fibula fracture. He was wearing a right knee brace the whole game, which was a surprise. I went back to review the 49er playoff game from last year, and he did not have a knee brace on, so this is something new this offseason. There was a report after the game that he had a bone bruise, so it's possible that the knee brace was for a bone bruise that happened prior to the game, because I didn't see any injury to him during the game. Bone bruises are typically caused by a knee hyperextension like we saw with Sam Laporta and Derek Barnes last year. James Houston had a nice edge rush from the right edge position on the first series, got good pressure on the quarterback. He mostly played left defensive end after that, which was a curious decision, and he didn't look very effective at that spot. He did not try to do his outside dip rush from the left side. It's going to be harder for him to rush from the left side because it puts an external rotation strain on that ankle, which was the mechanism of his injury. So not sure what the coach's strategy is with him right now. Being preseason, maybe they were just giving him some work on the left side to see if he could do it. For max productiveness going forward, though, he may just need to stick on the right side exclusively this year. About a week ago, Dan Campbell said that they're ending the experiment of him playing Sam linebacker and just focusing on him being a pass-rushing D end, which I think is smart. I always found it curious why they were trying to expand his duties, especially coming off a major injury. A pure pass-rushing D end is one of the most valuable positions in the NFL. Guys can make $30 million a year doing it. So if that's all Houston does, it seems like that would be plenty. At UselessInfoMI on X asked, is your opinion based on movements his body is used to versus new movements that might strain his leg or he may not be comfortable with? These are all reasons why I would not want to put him in different positions right now. I'd want his entire rehab and reps to be on the pass rush to strengthen that ankle for that specific, extremely valuable task. Number 2, he was never good at coverage anyway, and his injured ankle, which can limit his lateral movement ability, might make that even harder. We already saw the Lions give up on him playing linebacker in pass coverage. So it was clearly a waste of time, so it's a good thing that they pulled the plug on that experiment. Third reason is doing tasks he's not comfortable with on a gimpy ankle could cause other injuries. And maybe that's what caused the hyperextension and bone bruise that he's suffering from now. Other players that played during the game, Zonovan, the artist formerly known as Bam Knight, got in the third quarter, caught some passes, did a lot of running. He looked great, showing great burst. Remember, he's coming back from a season-ending left shoulder injury, which may have been a shoulder dislocation and labral tear. Got a lot of touches, looked great. Another guy who looked great was Ennis Rakestraw, our second rounder. And remember, this is his first game action since core muscle surgery, which he had after his college season. We took a medical risk on drafting him, but so far, looks like it's panning out. Another guy with a medical risk was Makai Wingo, draft pick in the 6th round. He looked good. He had groin surgery last year. Uncertain of the details, possibly a core muscle, but he's been looking really good so far as well. All right, that's a wrap on the Giants game, so let's get to the post-game news. The most concerning and most terrifying was Jahmyr Gibbs. Hurt his hamstring on the Monday after the game. He missed 2 games with a hamstring last year. Now, there was some misinformation spread online that Gibbs had torn his ACL because of claim that there's a correlation between hamstring strains and ACL tears. At Dr. Lurker6223 on X wanted me to comment on the supposed correlation between hamstrings and ACLs. I've never heard of hamstring strains leading to ACLs. I did a search for such a study and found nothing. Now, theoretically, maybe it's possible, but you have to be cautious about making conclusions based on theory alone. And here's the problem with conflating correlation with causation. Hamstring strains are extremely common in the NFL. We've seen Laporta, Gibbs, and Jamir go down in the past year with it. ACL tears are also common in the NFL, so it's easy to find correlation between the two. That doesn't mean one causes the other. What's also extremely common in the NFL players is that they have a very attractive partner. According to my exhaustive, independent research, 96% of NFL players who tore an ACL had an attractive girlfriend and or wife. So breaking news here, sex with hot chicks are linked to ACL tears. Jahmyr Gibbs, I've seen your girlfriend up close, so you must have torn your ACL. I actually did see his girlfriend up close as I was standing directly behind her on an escalator at SoFi last year at the Chargers game. My wife noticed that she had the name Gibbs embroidered on the back of her denim miniskirt, so I used my elite powers of deduction to conclude that she was Gibbs' girlfriend. My first guess actually was that she was Gibbs' mom, but my wife educated me that apparently you can't give birth to a baby when you're like 1 year old. Fortunately, correlation doesn't mean causation, and Gibbs did not tear his ACL. He only has a mild hamstring injury. So what's the prognosis for him? Totally depends on severity, but good chance he's back for the opener. Last year, Gibbs returned in 3 weeks from a mild hamstring. This year, the opener is 4 weeks from the time of his hamstring injury. Dan Campbell yesterday said that Gibbs will start practicing next week after the Steeler game, which suggests he is on track for the opener. Now, for you guys who play fantasy football, the question is he going to be limited this first game back? Well, I think it's a good idea to limit him and ease him in over a couple games because I don't want to aggravate that hamstring. But based on the Lions' handling of him last year, I don't expect any limitations if he plays. In his first game back from his hamstring last year, he had 11 rushes for 68 yards and 9 receptions for 58 yards, so no limitations at all. More terrifying news came out after the Giants game. That was Tyrion Arnold went down with an upper body injury, potentially a pec. Ian Rappaport reported a pec injury, but described it as a bruise and not a strain, and should be ready for the regular season. A bruise is great news, much better than a strain, because a strain is a tear of a pec. Since Arnold's slated to be our starting cornerback, Lions are probably going to play it safe and avoid him having any further contact to that pec the rest of the preseason. An update this week from Dan Campbell sounds like he's fine and he will be ready for the opener. Now, this raised a question from @AndyHauser22 on X. Do you think DBs have too intensive of a lifting program, especially since all the injuries are pectoral in nature? Good question here. That's certainly something to look into if more pec strains pop up. If Tyrion's pec is just a bruise, then that's not a factor here. Now, generally, the way pec tears happen is when the muscle of the pec overpowers the tendon during an eccentric motion. An eccentric motion is when the motion is opposite of the way the muscle is pushing. The classic example involving the pec is when you're doing the bench press and you're lowering the bar down to your chest. So you're pushing up, but the bar's going down. That's an eccentric motion. I know that a lot of weightlifters feel that eccentric weight training is important for building muscle, and while that may be true, there is that increased risk of tearing a muscle or tendon, so it might be smart for football players to limit the amount of eccentric lifting they do, especially during the season when there's limited recovery time after a lift. And also not overtraining or overbuilding that muscle is probably a good idea too, to prevent that muscle from overpowering the tendon. Another guy who had an injury post-game was Ennis Rakestraw, who had an ankle. He left practice on the Monday. He reportedly was trying to play through it, which is a good sign. Earlier reports suggest it's minor, so no concerns for the start of the season. Now let's move on to the Chiefs game. Fortunately, this game was much better from an injury standpoint than the Giants game. James Houston did not play in this game, possibly related to the bone bruise as mentioned earlier. He wore a big right knee brace last game. Now, if it's a simple bone bruise, he could be back this week for the Steelers preseason game. If he's on the bubble, then maybe he's playing. If he's definitely making the team, then the Lions really shouldn't play him to give any bone bruise the most time to heal. Bone bruises can injure the articular cartilage of the knee, which is an important long-term issue. The mechanism of a bone bruise is a hyperextension of the knee, so that can sprain knee ligaments, so that may need some healing time also. Another guy who was wearing his knee brace was Nate Sudfeld, still wearing his left knee brace and still looking terrible. So basically a deja vu of the last preseason game. The other quarterback, Hendon Hooker, looked better, ran less, slid more, but he barely avoided another concussion. On that 2-point play, he got slammed down hard, but fortunately didn't hit his head on the turf or have any significant whiplash. As far as Hooker's performance, better, but I'd still be terrified if we need him to play any significant amount of time this season. Goff has played every game the past 2 seasons, so we need to pray for that to continue. I'm hoping Hooker plays the entire 3rd preseason game to really get some good work in. Dan Campbell has already mentioned that he's going to start in this last preseason game. Now, the biggest and most fascinating injury news coming out of this game involved our favorite eligible, sometimes fake eligible, offensive lineman.
There it comes. If he had to make you play on Evan David, as the eligible receiver, with 70 is eligible. They brought in an extra, look at that.
That's Dan Skipper, who looked like he had a bilateral high ankle sprain, happened on the very first play of the game, got rolled up on from behind, got both ankles trapped in external rotation, which is the mechanism of the high ankle sprain. He finished the drive, which was a good sign, but was limping towards the end of the drive, never returned to the game. Dan Campbell, after the game, mentioned it was a minor ankle sprain. So a mild high ankle can still knock a player out for 2 to 4 weeks. Last year, we had 2 other offensive linemen with very similar injuries. In the eerie coincidence, the last time we played at Arrowhead, the left tackle then, Taylor Decker, also got rolled up, finished the game, but missed the next 2. Jonah Jackson later in the season had a high ankle, finished the game, but missed the next 3. So the outlook for Skipper going forward, good chance he's ready for the season opener, but likely limited for the rest of the preseason. The next player is a guy who's likely out for the start of the regular season, and that's Trey Kwang Smith, who had a hand injury. The suspicious play was late in the 4th quarter when his right hand got sandwiched and smacked and torqued while he was blocking. He played 2 more players but never returned. Dan Campbell says he's out for a little while. Now, hand injuries of any kind need to be fully healed for a wide receiver. Unlike most other positions, you can't just splint it or cast it up like you might with the O-line, D-line, linebacker, cornerback, etc., and be back out there in a week or 2. We saw Alex Anzalone last year with left thumb surgery and only missed 1 game. For a wide receiver, if it's a simple fracture, we're looking at 6 to 8 weeks. A sprain in the hand could be back sooner, but could actually be longer because a sprain can take longer to heal than a fracture. He ended up being placed on IR. That means he's a free agent, but potentially could return to the Lions later this year. All right, now let's get to the news post-Chiefs game. The big one is DJ Reader and what's going on with him. He says he had a knee scope in June that affected his ability to rehab. This is definitely a little bit concerning. The scope probably was not directly related to the quad tendon tear. Usually a scope is for cartilage issues in the knee, like a torn meniscus that needs trimming, or loose cartilage that's floating around that can cause irritation. That needs to be sucked out and pulled out of the knee. Not surprising to have cartilage issues in a 30-year-old 300-pound defensive tackle, but still not a good sign for long-term durability. Bottom line is this adds more concerns to his durability for this season and beyond. The quad tendon tear already carries significant durability concerns. Many players don't make it a full year after that injury. So the over-under for games played by Reeder this year might only be about 10. So if you agree with that, then you don't even want to see him start the season until about the midway point if you hope to have him ready for the playoffs. At King Taz on Twitter reposted with a comment, "Good thing Broderick is ready." Well, I certainly hope so. Even if Broderick Martin isn't ready, it's a good idea to give him playing time to try to develop a long-term plan at the DT position. This is another benefit to not playing Reeder early this season. Our long-range DT outlook is very much up in the air. Levi's on the last year of his deal. Aleem is on the last year of his deal. Hopefully he gets extended soon, though. Reeder is only on a 2-year deal, and as I discussed, age and durability mean he can't be counted on. Dan Campbell mentioned yesterday, August the 20th, that Reeder may start individuals next week. Now, I'm assuming this means individual drills. According to the PUP rules, if he starts individual drills, he must be taken off the PUP. Now, for a while, I've been expecting Reeder to remain on PUP into the regular season for a variety of reasons, including freeing up a roster spot, so it'll be interesting to see if the Lions actually take him off PUP before the season starts. If that happens, I take it as a good sign for his rehab, but I still hope the Lions go easy on him early in the season. Reeder himself might be pushing to come back as he has a per-game roster bonus of $62,000 per game. The next guy up to talk about is Sam Laporta, who hurt his hamstring prior to the Giants game and is still not practicing. No significant concern yet, but we do want to see him start to practice soon to start ramping him up for the regular season. Remember, he's coming off that left knee hyperextension and bone bruise, which shouldn't be an issue now. Dan Campbell did state that Laporta is planning on starting practice next week and should be ready for the opener. Dan Campbell yesterday also gave positive reports on a number of other players who've had minor issues, including Gibbs with his hamstring, Tyrion Arnold with his pec, Zeitler with his shoulder, Rakestraw with an ankle, Skipper with his high ankle, Carlton Davis with a hamstring, and Amik Robertson. All those guys sound like they should be ready for Week 1 versus the Rams. Now let's finish up with Christian Mahogany, our 6th-round pick who we've yet to see in training camp yet. Dan Campbell said after the Giants game that he was back in the building. Well, it's been a week and a half since, and apparently he's still stuck in the building somewhere. Maybe he got lost. He's a rookie, so who knows? Still waiting for proof of life here for Mahogany. Maybe we can sneak Jeff Risdon into the building for a recon mission. So it's been now 4.5 weeks since camp started. There was that rumored diagnosis I discussed last episode, which, if true, nothing serious, nothing life-threatening, nothing long-term, but does keep players out for about 3 to 4 weeks with a small chance of longer if there are any complications. Currently, we're at 4.5 weeks, so we really should see him out on the practice field anytime soon. There may be roster management decisions going on here as well. The Lions may want to just keep him on NFI into the season, which would free up a roster spot at that 53-man cutdown. All right, there was some breaking news as I was recording this today, August the 21st. Penei Sewell reportedly went down with a left foot injury, although some said that the trainers were looking at the ankle also. Generally, I take an ankle over a foot because an ankle likely means a high or low ankle sprain, which is not a terrible result. An Achilles injury can be ruled out as that's usually an immediate diagnosis. It was reported as a foot injury. There are a couple of optimistic signs here based on the extremely limited info so far. Number one, he walked off under his own power. In camp, they'll bring out a cart for a hangnail, so if they let him walk, it suggests the trainers did not see anything overly concerning on the initial evaluation. Number two, apparently it's possible some people saw that the trainers were looking to tape it. If this is true, then that would be something that they would not even consider if they suspected something serious. So that can be taken as a very good sign. Now, the possible diagnoses for the foot here, in medical terms, we call it the differential diagnosis. A mild situation would be a bruise or a laceration. That would be very insignificant, no issues. More severe would be a turf toe, a plantar fascia issue, or some other sprain. There are 26 bones in the foot connected by all sorts of ligaments and tendons, so many different sprains are possible. The most serious thing concerning here would be a Jones or a Lisfranc. Justin Rogers later on tweeted out that he heard from a source that said he's good, so that's a very reassuring update for Panay. As I discussed earlier this episode, we really need Sewell and Decker to stay healthy this year, as our backup situation is really unproven. Hopefully Sorsdahl and Manu can get through the game healthy against the Steelers and get a lot of experience in case they're needed later on this year. Now, while I'm fine with Dan Skipper and the jumbo package, he's really not been an effective offensive tackle in the past. Craig Reynolds also got hurt today with a lower body injury, but there's been no other details beyond that. So that's it for today. Overall, this preseason, there's been a lot of news, a lot of scares, but really not too bad from an injury standpoint. No major stars or even any starters have had anything serious. Remember, we had a very healthy year last year, so hopefully that luck continues. It's our depth that's really taking a hit this preseason, so hopefully we can get through the Steelers game without any more injuries. No starters are going to play at all, so they are all going to be safe. Dan Campbell did mention that there are 5 or 6 roster spots still up in the air, but the guys who don't make the team are just going to land on our practice squad anyway, so I don't see much of a difference there. The Steelers game is this Saturday. This one's live on NFL Network, so I'll be keeping an eye on this one. I wouldn't mind if the game just got canceled and everybody just went to Permanente Brothers for an eating contest. That would probably be more entertaining to watch, with the only injury risk there being a fecal impaction. I've had to perform a fecal disimpaction procedure before with my finger. Let me tell you, no fun for anybody involved. So enjoy the game, and I'll talk next time before the regular season opener.
Hey, did you know the Detroit Lions podcast does fantasy leagues? If you want to test your skills while supporting the DLP content creators from Doc, B&B, Chris and the Riz, and me, there are leagues that let you support the podcast while also paying out cash prizes to our listeners. Grab your swords and wands and find the dragon hiding in the depths of... What? Oh, it's not that kind of fantasy? What is it, some weird sex thing? No? Alright, well, anyway, just search Detroit Lions Podcast Fantasy Football and ignore anything like that pops up. Click our link and join the fun.